Good morning.
Morning. Today is Sunday, October 5th, 2025. Let's begin, as we always do, by saying four measurables. May all beings have
Happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from happiness, which is never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion.
Okay, so Victoria is going to start this week, and then we'll meditate, and then if you have any questions, we'll take some questions.
Good morning. Rinpoche always says, Garchen Rinpoche, our teacher, always says that bodhicitta, why we cultivate bodhicitta, why it's so important for us to cultivate bodhicitta, is because bodhicitta really protects our mind. And what does it protect our mind from? It protects our mind from the afflictions. And afflictions are the basis of the ego mind. So in Buddhism, in many ways, you speak about not so much about the two minds, like the mind of ignorance, which is the ego mind of self-grasping and the source of afflictions, or the wisdom mind, which is, where bodhicitta is cultivated, and it's the mind that is capable of seeing reality directly, ultimately. Obviously it doesn't come for us as beginners, but we do work when we meditate, we practice, we dedicate our lives to practice. Needless to say, this is where, our awareness is aiming for. And it's not really two minds. Often in Buddhism, we use the term Rigpa, which is wisdom, and Marikpa, which is ignorance. The Marikpa, the ignorant mind, is a mind of what is called the ordinary sentient being. And the mind of Rigpa is a mind of, someone who is now working on their awareness, in regaining their awareness from the yoke of the mind of affliction. But the right way to really look at it is that without the Rigpa, without the, our base, without the ground awareness, which is often in Buddhism called the Buddha nature, and all sentient beings possess it. A being with a mind has the basis, the causal basis for attaining enlightenment, because on the basis of Buddha nature. So this layer is the ground layer. And for me, it's very helpful to think of it like eyesight and cataracts. The ego mind, the ignorance mind, is like just having cataracts on your eyes all the time and never being able to see. But before we get the cataracts, our eyes are okay. There's a kind of a more primordial nature of vision, and that is the nature of seeing, being able to discern appearances, and a more, the floating floaters and whatever the cataract condition, puts on the eyesight, and the ability to discern clearly. So the two minds, or rather the two layers of the mind, are the ground, the Buddha nature, and the appearance. Our ego mind is projections and expectations. This is how we're groomed. This is how we're raised. It's really a result of much conditioning from, conditioning starts almost in the womb. There are the research shows that we learn to recognize things and tones of the mother's voice while we are still in the womb. So really that kind of mind of projections, ideas, concepts starts to really form at a very, very early age. The ego mind is not capable of looking at reality because that's like the cataracts. You know, the ego mind is always looking in terms of me. The two kinds of ignorances, you know, what really creates the ego mind are the ignorance of not knowing how reality is. That's called the co-emergent ignorance. And the proliferating ignorance is the ignorance that separates reality, breaks everything into two, self and other. You know, it's the mind that loses the ability to know that everything is connected, everything is moving simultaneously together. You know, there is no otherness. The ego mind is trained to always kind of withdraw into itself and always look from this kind of point of self and self-grasping, self-attachment to look at the other. And actually what really happens is that we lose the ability to look at the moment and to look at what is present in front of us. And everything we look at is always filtered through the ego mind. We actually lose the ability. You know, little children do look at things and are capable of seeing things in a much clearer way because they're not so filled with projections, expectations, and desire to fit in and desire to have pleasure. Whereas as adults, you know, that's really all we know. As adults, our minds are just regurgitating constant projections, expectations, and desires. And so it is very, very important to carefully think, are we looking at reality? Are we capable of just being in front of what is? Or are we always in this kind of mind that wants things to be different? So as an example, we have a difficult child, we have a difficult partner, we have a difficult parent. Do we find ourselves thinking, why is he saying this? Why is he acting like that? Why is he not telling me what I want to hear? Why is he not behaving in the ways that I I think to be acceptable? We have to really guard ourselves. We have to find our wisdom. And wisdom is really, the wisdom mind is being able to be with what there is. You know, wisdom mind is looking out and seeing and being okay with what there is, being okay with the difficult person, not wanting them to be anything different. And if there is some kind of a desire, it is a desire for them not to suffer, not to be angry, not to be afflicted, not to be stuffed with all these things that are tormenting that person at that time. You know, we as practitioners have to learn how to discern our wisdom mind that is capable of being in a situation, but being open to a difficult situation, being open to a difficult person. And we have to learn how to discern of not constantly being in the mind of projection, of the mind of this kind of personas, you know, that we have accumulated through countless lifetimes. I listened to a teaching by Pema Chodron, and she said, you know, we are in a very, very difficult time right now. She's, of course, speaking about our country, but I would, you know, venture to say that the world is, all of us on this planet at the moment are in very difficult places. There are very few places that feel like paradise that are not filled with conflict and anger and fear. And so with this very, very difficult time, it is even harder to simply look out there and be okay and be present to what there is. But this is really what has to be. This is where the practice is really the most critical and necessary. And what does it mean? Be okay in the face of what there is. What is it okay to be in the face of anger, in the face of madness, in the face of, you know, calamity, in the face of bombs? You know, that is really practice. And then she said something very interesting. She said that her teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, who was like this brilliant mind with incredible capacity, with very pure vision. You know, he was really kind of the comet that brought, the star that brought the light of Buddhism to the West. And she said that he predicted this difficult time, and he predicted that this is what's going to happen. And he also said that this is the time where practice becomes most critical. So when we look out there, do we simply see our own projections, expectations, the stuffing and programming we are filled to the brim with, our habitual repetitive attitudes that solidified into like multiple identities of the family persona, of our work persona, of our social persona, of our country persona? Do we think in village minds? Do we think in nationalism? Do we think in specious mind? Or do we have the capacity of dropping all that crap and just kind of like be present to what there is? Because really, you know, if we find ourselves being triggered, and by the way, you know, when we're triggered, it's very important to find and to know that things that trigger us about others are always things that exist internally within us. You know, do we answer anger with anger? Do we answer fire with fire? Or can we quell our own little person who's so afraid not to fit in, or scream louder, you know, or be bigger, or, you know, hurt someone more than they're hurting us? Or can we actually be the mind of wisdom that can just like stand and be present to the person who is suffering? Because a person who is angry is a person who is suffering. You know, they're the ones who are afraid not to fit in. They're the ones who are maybe very filled and under this enormous weight of social expectation and what is happening all around. You know, people that get swept into these kinds of narratives and, you know, have very difficult time kind of emerging, you know, from under the weight of all that difficulty and pollution. Are we going to be like that? Are we going to be just triggered? Are we going to be just a part of that narrative? Or are we going to be able to kind of like find our own island in our own mind? Will we be able to look at a person who is angry, screaming, bashing, and say that person is actually suffering enormously? It's like a trapped animal in the trap who is like one paw in the trap and the other paw scratching and clawing and screaming and crying. You know, will we have the mind of looking at the situation, being in the situation, and making that stuff visible? Or are we just going to answer with this layer of our own craziness, of our own trap, of our own being caught in the snares of our ego mind? So please always know that when we are reacting, when we are responding, when we're caught up in the, you know, when we start to scream in the face of anger, when we start to beat in the face of, you know, that kind of stuff, we're not acting, we are reacting. And there's a very, very fundamental, huge difference, you know, because one is this mind of ignorance, one is a mind of wisdom. And can we ever hope to change the situation when we are reacting, when we are badging and screaming and pounding with our ego mind that is afraid to be, not to fit in, or is afraid to like hit someone later, or is afraid to scream at someone later? You know, are we caught in the trap and the net of that? Because remember, we do have social karma, we have group karma, we don't have only personal karma. We're trapped in bigger nets, not just our own little net, not in our own little cage in the prism of our own ego. We're caught in, you know, there's a reason why we're born in this time, in this place, etc., in this family, in this country, in this group. You know, are we going to be those people that look at what is happening and say, it is my karma that I have created to be born at this time, in this family, in this country, in this period, historical movement? The wisdom mind always knows that what is happening is there never superfluously, never without a reason. It's just karma ripening. Are we going to be the mind that is going to look at difficulties and conflicts and allow these difficulties and conflicts to become our teacher? Or are we going to be swept away and be these generators of more and more and more negative karma? Difficult people should become like spaces of practice, of firing up our wisdom, not things that sweep us out into the ocean of anger and demolish any presence of mind, of our wisdom mind. Do we find ourselves, when we look introspectively, do we find ourselves at our ego that reacts and wants to be right, wants a very simple narrative, wants to be dominant, wants to be the winner? Or do we create a gap before we open our mouth, before we act with our body? And we say, we stop that thought, and we say, that particular thought, that concept arose in my polluted, reactive ego mind, and I do not need to identify with that. Yes, there's a lot of garbage. I am swimming in the ocean of garbage currently in my immediate pool, in my news feeds, in my social context, in the anger, in the, ferocity of, people wanting to bash one another, because this fight for dominance, I am right, you are wrong, it's just like ego on steroids, because ego is not just personal. There are also social ego structures, the bigger ego structures. Companies have ego structures. Companies and smaller, families function under particular kinds of mindfulness and non-mindfulness structures. Families and tiny little social structures, bigger structures, and biggest structures. Everyone has some kind of a social, everyone has some kind of a philosophy, the view, and, from which our actions and, our behaviors issue forth. But we really have to find our own, we have to be islands of our own. When we cannot find islands with communities, and even to find islands with communities, we first have to be an island of our own. We have to cultivate our own sanity. In Buddhism, before we join the community and we do all the kind of stuff, we are always told, nobody's coming to save us. There's not going to be any kind of panacea. We have to correct our madness. We have to cure the disease. The disease is our ego and self-grasping. And if we want to get at the mind of wisdom, which is our Buddha nature, and we are born with that, we have to work to that on our own. So please, before we answer, because we right now are living through a very difficult time where there's almost no gap in which mindfulness can kind of come and have strength. So we have to create it for ourselves all the time. Learn to create a gap between words and actions. Escape. If you have a difficult child, you have a difficult parent, you have a difficult partner, you have a difficult boss, difficult neighbors, difficult country, etc., and like bigger and bigger circles that encapsulate, please understand, this is my karma. This is where I have to be. This is the right place for me to be here right now. Please create a gap for mindfulness. Don't fall into this prison of ego and start to feel like a victim and have your anger withdraw into depression and become like passive aggressive. Don't have anger mutate into other forms of, and go underground and become something else. Like, from one root of poison sprout hundreds and thousands roots of poisons, and stick to I am right, they are wrong. Find mindfulness. Please understand that all afflictions are where suffering is happening. You hear a screaming person, you see a difficult person, understand that that difficult boss probably is suffering tremendous weight of the expectations and information that is burdening and bearing his or her mind. Understand that your difficult mother who keeps screaming and badgering and not ever saying positive things is a person who is always suffering, who has never found solace of love for oneself. Therefore, they don't know how to act from that place. Please understand that compassion is something that is always going to guard your mind. And what is compassion? Compassion is not, I'm going to be a nice guy and you can beat me up and you can kick me and you can scream at me. I'm just going to sit back and take it. Compassion is the mind of wisdom. It's the mind that knows even if the person is under the malady of affliction, they still have Buddha nature. Compassion is the wisdom mind that knows impermanence and knows interconnectedness and that knows karma, cause and effect. Compassion is the preliminary step to any kind of wisdom mind, because compassion is the very thing that can guard us against the mind of the ego, against these cataracts. Compassion is like, I am living with cataracts, but I'm going to put on these glasses. This is my practice. I'm going to create a gap. And before I answer with my body, with action, or my words with my door of my speech, I'm going to check my mind. I'm going to see if I'm reacting. Am I getting angry? Do I want to scream? Do I want to hit? Do I want the person to be different? Why can't they act how I want? If I find myself in that mind, bang, I interrupt it and I go right into my mind of wisdom. Instead of judging, projecting, wanting things to be different, I just stay here. I just look and I just see. I'm present to what is my reality on the ground. I don't scream, I don't hit, I don't beat, I see. And from that seeing, there's a little bit of hope of, first of all, I'm not adding with my own projections of anger. And, if I'm not hooked, if I'm not caught, the fire is not doubled by both of us, like screaming and fighting and doing this kind of things. But there is a hope that step one, I change myself. I don't scream and I don't hit back. Step two, when the wisdom mind starts to grow, compassion starts to grow, because seeing, knowing, compassion arises on that basis. Compassion is wisdom. Like I said, it's not just being nice and letting someone hit you and beat you. Compassion is a wisdom that sees the other person really suffer, understands that whatever social unrest and insanity that's happening is based on enormous quantities propelling of suffering. That's where compassion arises, and knowing that we are connected to that. So we stand always in front of a choice. How will I comport myself? What will I do in this very instance? Am I going to be swept and, be a part of this, greater suffering that creates suffering, because anger creates anger, jealousy creates jealousy, ignorance creates ignorance? Or am I going to kind of stand and be an island and at least try not to wait at the poison by polluting myself with my 5 afflictions? And that's really what practice is. We have to practice. We sit on the cushion so that we can bring that practice. When we sit on the cushion, to learn that we have wisdom, to learn that we are an island, but we're not disconnected from anything. In fact, we're connected to all things, because there is no minds. There is mind, and the mind of the Buddhas and sentient beings is the same. Please create a gap. Please hold mindfulness awareness, which is impermanence, interdependence, karma, cause and effect. In every single moment, mindfulness knows that if I act and say or act with negativity, I'm creating negative karma. Interdependence. I am connected to this person, so what is my connection going to be? Am I gonna meet fire with fire and double it up and burn more stuff around? Or am I gonna be water? I'm gonna be compassion, I'm gonna be wisdom and quell. And I'm also gonna be able to use this difficult situation as a practice situation and have this be the place where I practice, or be swept into it and become go with the flow with the garbage, pollution. And of course, remembering impermanence, that all these things that mean so much to us right now, all these forces, all these tastes, all these expectations, all these projections, they arise and they will fall, they will dissolve. Understanding, that all these polluted things, their ultimate basis is pure. It's Buddha nature. And the Buddha nature is like the mind of sentient beings and the Buddhas. So please inhale, take a moment, create a gap. Don't learn. Practice is being on the side of wisdom and starting to dismantle the habitual propensities of the ego, the species mind, the nationalistic mind, what do they call it? That group mentality, tribal mentality, the village mentality, the me, give me this, be different, give me what I want, why don't you change? That mentality has to be dismantled, dismembered, and thrown out. We have to purify, we have to remove the cataracts, and we have skillful means, create a gap. Before you answer, learn to look and see the internal state from which actions and responses arise. Make sure they're not arising from this mind of pollution, okay? We're going to be just in time with our answers and our actions. We don't have to be always afraid. In fact, if we're acting out of a place of fear, we are acting from a place of ego. So we are acting from a place of unmindfulness. But as practitioners, we really cannot allow ourselves to do that, because, every time we answer like that from ignorance, it solidifies, becomes habitual propensities, becomes our everything, becomes, from waking moment to sleeping moment, and through sleep becomes, every moment of our existence. We really, really have to dismantle that, if we want practice, if we want wisdom mind. And we need wisdom mind. We really need that place. We need compassion. We need wisdom, especially now. We have to practice really like hell, like crazy. We have to practice now harder than ever, because of, look what surrounds us. Everything is kind of ablaze. And I don't want to be a pessimist, but this is the time that was predicted by the masters. And it was said that, very, very strong, skillful means were going to be available to us at this time for stronger practices. So, as Michael and I always encourage you, find teachers with lineages, teachers who teach from the time of Buddha with uninterrupted lineages until now. Find beings like our teacher Garchen Rinpoche, whose minds are not polluted. They're not ordinary sentient beings who work out of their afflictive emotions and me mind. That's the thing. When we find the teachers, what we find are not like people in their bodies, like a guy with a different hairdo. What we find is a different kind of mind. We find wisdom mind in our teachers, and we want to connect to that, and we want to have the blessing of that mind. So please, I encourage you to practice and find teachers.
Thank you. I have to make an adjustment here. Meditation. Okay. This is not good. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. We'll meditate. Nick, if you could put in the chat the last class where there's a full review, because we're just gonna, most of these people today have been here. So we'll meditate now, and if you have questions about what Victoria spoke about or anything, there's a Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar. So let's start by taking our posture, sitting on a cushion, cross-legged, or in a chair. Some people might not need a cushion. I find it helps to have the hips aligned or above the knees. Back is straight but not rigid. Head is slightly tilted, kind of following the angle of the gaze, which is following the bridge of the nose almost. The head is slightly tilted. The mouth is lightly closed, but the teeth slightly apart, and the tongue rests where the upper teeth meet the roof of your mouth. So you're breathing through your nose unless you can't, and breathe through your mouth if you have congestion or issues. Hands, we do left palm, the right, or just on the knees like this. Some people do this on the knees, like this, whatever's comfortable. We meditate in this class with the eyes open. Gaze rests lightly on whatever's before it, not intense, not out of focus, spaced out, but just easy, resting the gaze on what's in front of it. And rest the mind and body. Just make an effort to just let go, settle, be calm, and let's do 3 breaths through the nose. Not deep breaths, not shallow breaths, easy, natural breaths. And we work with the 2 techniques. One is always bringing our mind back to the breath, where the breath actually, our attention goes, where the breath moves in and out, where the nostrils meet the upper lip. So the whole crux of this practice is to become aware that a thought has arisen. And we don't push the thought away, we don't run from it, and we don't follow it and entertain it. What we do is become aware it has arisen, and we leave it where it is, and then say back to the breath and focus our attention not on the thought, but on this place and on the breath. Or we use the visualization as the mind as an infinite, limitless, stainless, infinite sky, and the thought arises like a cloud from within that mind, and we watch that thought dissolve once we're aware that it has arisen in the mind. That's the key to this practice. Victoria was talking about awareness, the gap, creating the gap. Well, that's what we're doing. By watching the mind, seeing that the thought has arisen, instead of reacting to the thought, getting angry at the thought, pushing it away, it's wrong, we just notice it. And here we're making a decision because we're not interacting with another person. We're not out in public. We're just alone in our own space, and we're making this conscious decision to leave the thought where it is and settle everything, settle back into this calm, settle back into this sky-like nature of mind. That's all we're doing. And repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. So let's begin. I'll set our timer here. you need a deep breath, like a burst of oxygen, take one and then settle back into the natural breath. If you need to adjust your body because you're feeling tension, uncomfortable, adjust the body, settle back into the calm, settle back into the posture, back to the breath. Great. Okay. We will go to some questions, if you have any. It could be about practice, meditation practice, or anything Victoria spoke about. Just general stuff that always comes up. One is, if you're looking for books, for beginners, or even if you're not a beginner, or teachers, well, we suggest go to the Solidago Productions website. There's a list of teachers. Go to their websites. Go to YouTube. Find their teachings. There's a wealth of teachings on YouTube for a lot of these teachers. And a lot of these teachers, if you can't travel to where they are in person for teachings and empowerments, you can do it through Zoom often. Get on their email lists, become aware of, where they're teaching and when they're teaching and when these things happen. It's a great way to stay connected. As far as if you're starting with this, often people ask, how often, how long? The best thing for results and, some kind of progress is to make this a daily habit. Start with very short sessions, a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Make it as regular as possible. If you can, find a space in your house, a corner or whatever, to make it your space for meditation, so that's your space. And, the more regular you make this, the more it starts to, and with the goal is to create that gap, to create that mindfulness and awareness in daily life. The more you habituate. Actually, meditation in Tibetan is gom, which means to habituate. Thank you. This is my first session. How can we help people in these difficult times? How do we spread our message? The best thing you could do to help people is to work with yourself and your own mind. So, when you start to work with your own negative emotions, you're contributing to this interconnected world and universe in something that's pacified and positive and not with the afflictive emotion. That's the most effective way to help others. I mean, of course, there's many ways. You can volunteer, you can give to charities, you can help someone in your neighborhood or in your building, an elderly person, and actions that are altruistic and benefiting others in a direct way. Of course, that goes without saying, right? But to do these things without working with our own negative emotions kind of, only will take us so far, right? So really, as you start to work with these afflictive emotions and negative emotions and start to find ways to become aware of them, to pacify them, the vibration you're sending out into the world is, of that pacified nature, of that positive nature. And that has it sounds hippity dippity or whatever, but it's real. That energy that you're creating is real, and that you're sending out into the world, and it absolutely has an immediate effect.
Yeah, the energy of sanity is extremely, extremely real, because look at another version of reality in which we live right now. The wars, the screaming, the bashing, it's all a result of afflictive emotions, and ignorance. I mean, have we ever lived through a period of ignorance that's deeper and thicker and more substantial than it is right now? Is war not a thing of aggressiveness, of anger, of desire for something else, covetousness? What we're living through is a display or play of afflictive emotions. And it's very important to guard our own mind. Once again, not to work through the ego to say our message. We never want to say to someone, I know and you don't. It's very, very important to guard our mind against things like that. What we have to know inside ourselves when we are acting is that we're not reacting. And the biggest knowing that we're acting from a right place is that we are not concerned for ourselves. We are acting from the place of benefit without any kind of expectations. We're not acting for the sake of results, applause, acknowledgement. We are acting because we know that that's what needs to be, that that's the only right action. Of course, we should be also aware that when we're acting out of negativity, we're creating negative karmic results for our future, and we will be certainly in presence of them soon enough. So that's, a kind of awareness we should also have. But, let's just make sure that we're acting, from the true benefit of others. We don't want to impose our narrative on someone else. Rather, we want to be sure that our activity at least once puts down or, eliminates acting from a negative place ourselves, not acting from ignorance. And the biggest sign that, we have presence of bodhicitta, we have presence of compassion, is that we, without any expectation of a result, are acting for the benefit of others. When our mind really becomes habituated to that, then we know real change has been made.
I mean, exactly what she said applies to several questions that we're getting about dealing with difficult loved ones who are, adult children or parents, people that we love who are suffering and are not being able to disconnect from their suffering. So having compassion, but also feeling their suffering. And what do we do? There's not one response to every situation. The allowing for this wisdom mind to arise through the practice, through understanding the view of Buddhism and through meditation practice and working, creating some kind of awareness, allowing that wisdom mind to arise so you can respond in the moment. There's not like one way to do things. Every situation's different, and moment by moment it's different. Your loved one does this, or your loved one comes home late, or your loved one doesn't call, or the loved one is cruel to you. Response in those moments, is going to be dictated by how present you can stay, how you're not, with family members, so much of it's habitual, historical, response over time, again and again and again and again, these dynamics that are created. So you're starting to break this habitual response. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of patience, And in some situations, you have to create boundaries, that have not existed in the past, because a lot of these very intimate relationships, the boundaries are either non-existent or very porous or very fuzzy. And both sides, us and the other and the loved one, have taken liberties that, we've gotten used to that are not necessarily healthy, probably. So, don't put the cart before the horse. These things, the change doesn't come from just an intellectual understanding of what Victoria was talking about today, or the view of Buddhism. It really comes from practice. That's how stuff starts to kind of, these relationships and our approach and interactions can start to change.
I just wanted to add that all are suffering, and I mean all, every kind, 84,000 kinds of negative emotions and all the kinds of suffering that's created from that. Buddha gave 84,000 teachings to speak to the 84,000 afflicted emotions, because out of the 5, 84,000 combinations are created. All the suffering that arises is created from us not being able to be present to what there is. Its suffering is created by us always desiring for something to be different than it is. We want that person to change. We want them to speak softly. We want them to be like this and like this. But really at the bottom of it is our ego that demands from them what it does not demand from the self. Okay? We always in Buddhism start with ourselves. We create a gap. We look internally. We say, am I angry already? Like before that person even opens their mouth, they walk into the room, is my habitual propensity sparking right into play? And I'm not negating and minimizing, difficult situations, but please look at difficult. First of all, remember that all the greatest of difficulties are going to be given to us in the present, in the presence of the closest to us beings, because that's where we really have to work on ourselves. That's the ground of practice. That's where, we start with ourselves, and then our immediate is where all the difficulties are going to be concentrated right here. They're not going to be in another country far away. Yes, of course, we meet obstacles, in those kinds of terms as well, but usually it's obstacles like this: difficult mind, illnesses, difficult relatives, close circles of proximity. And so this is where our karma ripens. Our karma is not going to ripen far away where it doesn't touch us. Our karma is going to ripen here and now. And if we're okay with that, if we understand that this is the presence of my karma, this is where it ripened, I have to deal with this. This is what I have. So now, wisdom has to understand we're not working on the other, we're working on ourselves. We have control not over them, we have control over our own response. Am I going to be water? Am I going to be fire? Can I move my mind to wish happiness for them? Can I use that difficult person as practice for my patience, for my compassion, etc., etc., etc.? And is my wisdom mind understanding how much that other person suffers? Do we ever think about how much the other person suffers when they're screaming and pounding and doing all that kind of stuff? How difficult it is for a teenager to be a teenager, how difficult it is for an old person to be an old person facing death, etc., etc. All the uncertainty, all the ignorance, all the stuff that throws us into this spirals of mind of afflictions. Can we be the person who understands that? Can we use our wisdom mind? So, be okay, be an anchor in what is. Try not to get right away swept into, I want it to be like this, I wish it was like that, I wish he was a different person, I wish I didn't have this person in my life, I wish I had a different mother, I wish I had a different child. No, we have what we need, because this is the ripening of our karma, and we have to work with this, what we have, right in the face of it, right here and now. And it isn't easy, but that's what has to be done. And when we can understand that, and we can actually kind of just at least accept what there is, with acceptance starts a new way of living with it. A way through wisdom, through understanding, as opposed to rejection and pushing. The suffering comes from rejecting and pushing and wanting to be so different, because we're pushing against reality, and reality is always going to win. If it's our reality to have this difficult person right in front of us, and we can't abandon them, it's very difficult to abandon a parent or a child. We can get out of certain relationships which are abusive, and we should end them if we can't change them and bring them to some kind of a peaceful resolution. But there are situations where, leaving those situations is not an option. So in those kinds of situations, we really have to modify our own responses. We have to be extremely vigilant and mindful. That mindfulness has to be always present, steady flame of mind and compassion. And really, the change starts with understanding how much they suffer and what can we do for them, rather than always thinking how we want them to be so different. It's very, very helpful to get into the presence of the other and feel how much pain they suffer. We have to adopt different attitudes, not the me attitude of ignorance.
This is a good question about someone who had an experience where they were feeling a certain degree of physical pain for a whole week.
Oh, I have a quote for that. I actually just found that quote from Rinpoche
For what? A quote for what?
for illness.
Illness or specifically here physical pain and how it relates to sitting and meditation and.
Any kind of pain, any kind of illness. Okay, this is because someone asked that last week, and that's a recurrent question. And often, it often comes up in reference to sitting and meditating. Remember, we have a great resistance to change our patterns. So when we're changing our pattern by sitting and wanting to actually like look at our patterns and see our ego mind, there will be a tremendous amount of resistance, psychological, mental, psychological, emotional, and physical. It'll happen on all these levels, no question about it. This particular quote deals with illness, but I think any kind of physical pain, this quote is very, very useful. Conversely, if one grasps at the thought of illness, and I would say pain, right? One can worsen whatever physical problems are present and can even give rise to sickness where none exists. When the mind is focused on pain, we grasp, and focus on pain. The wind energies means like a life force, the energy of our mind. The Buddhists refer to it as wind, but think of it as just as an energy. When the wind energies gather in that place of when the mind is focused on pain, the wind energies gather in that place of pain. Wherever the wind energies gather, the blood pools, creating stagnation gather and give rise to disorders. So what Rinpoche means is when all the energy of our mind pools into that place and we focus, I have pain in my elbow, I have pain in my shoulder, I have an illness. We intensify that pain it's like taking a magnifying glass and using the sun, which is our mind, to shoot at that place of pain. You know what happens when we take a magnifying glass and the rays of sun are going, we're going to burn that place. So by focusing very, very intensely on that place, we're going to intensify it enormously because we will gather the energy of our mind and put it like, a magnifying glass onto that spot. So it is, as we always say, at that time, there are many techniques that can be used. Emptiness, like that feeling will dissipate. It arises, it will dissipate, just like the thoughts, the physical discomfort when you get up, it will dissipate. So don't focus so intensely. Another very, very, and even in the moments of anger in front of like a difficult person, instead of just focusing on how could he say that to me? How could he do that to me? Why does this hurt? We inhale difficult, dark stuff from the other, like in the presence of a difficult person. Before we respond, we inhale 3 times.
But in terms of pain.
But in terms of pain, we think of all the other beings who are in pain at this very moment, right? So instead of focusing on our own pain, we can think on a hospital with children with like brain tumors or, any hospital room, and we inhale, or any difficult situation, we inhale the pain of others, and we exhale the white Buddha light that becomes transformed in our heart center. And in our heart center, we think of like a white sphere of light, our Buddha mind, our energy, because really our mind, the seat of our mind is here. This is where our life force is in our heart, according, to Buddhism. And so we inhale the dark, and through the sphere of white light in our heart, we dissolve the darkness, we exhale it back. Basically what we do is we refocus our mind, right? We expand the focus. So with a difficult person, before we fire up and get swept into their fire, we do this, and then we can kind of like find our center, we can find the island, we create a gap. We bring mindfulness into the gap, right? Because the ego is the ego is doing this puppet play, you said this, he said this, he did this, he did that, the mind does not do that. The mind stays here and the mind watches the play of what's happening in front, without judging, projecting, etc. Same thing with the pain. We have pain, breathe in white light into that spot or expand it. The best is the expansion and thinking of others in that moment of their difficulty and exhaling, and you will see your pain will diminish. It's like magic. It always works.
And you'll have to keep going back and forth,
You'll have to
it'll come back and it'll be strong again, and then you apply that same kind of point of view and technique. Like when we were just sitting, the thought will come, you become aware, you let it go, you sit, you rest, it comes again.
And breathe in light into the difficult space. And always remember, as beginning practitioners, it's hard to sit. It comes with habituating the practice and making it stable. The more stability, the more easier, of course, the physical posture becomes. In the physical posture, the important thing is of course, the spine, the central channel. It has to be very straight, whether you're sitting like this on the floor or you're sitting in the chair. What's important is the central channel that runs parallel to our spine.
And all these techniques, again, it's like what we were just doing. Whether you're doing Tonglen, whether you're imagining other people who are sick, and or you're just meditating, dealing with thoughts, it's this constant, repeating. You'll lose your awareness and you'll be caught up in the thought, or you'll lose your awareness of other people's suffering and you'll be caught in your pain. And again, you repeat that technique. You repeat that awareness of other beings, suffering. You repeat that letting go of the thought. That's how we practice.
And compassion, compassion does not arise without a cause. The cause of compassion, the kind of the ground. Of course, compassion is wisdom mind. And it arises on the ability to see the other, to feel their pain, to know their suffering, to know that afflictions are ravaging their body, speech, and mind at the moment. That's where compassion arises. So, like I said again, don't please not confuse it with this ordinary sense. I'm a nice guy. They scream, I smile, they hit me, I just, no, it's really understanding on a much more profound, deeper level, deepest level, how much suffering that person who is under the throes of affliction, what they're going through at that moment, and how the affliction is completely like taking over and polluting them, and taking over their peace.
Okay, we're going to dedicate any merit generated today for the benefit of all beings by saying our dedication prayer. By this merit may all beings attain a state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Thank you, Nick, our producer, for today, and thank you all for being here. We will see you next time.